languages and media. My name is Dr. Georgia Ennis. I'm a postdoc at Penn State, and I organized this panel in various iterations. So just to begin, I want to acknowledge our presence as guests today on the traditional territories of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho nations and people. And we recognize them as well as the many other contemporary Native peoples who hold relationships with this land and these places. And we really wanted to begin with a land acknowledgement because of the work that all of us are doing in the ways that we engage with questions of settler colonialism and Indigenous resurgence. So we are a hybrid panel today. Joseph and myself are here, and we also have several people joining us on Zoom, but unfortunately our discussant, Tony Webster, wasn't able to make it at the last minute, so we'll have a little bit of extra time for discussion at the end. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Joseph. Let me pull up his slides really quick. Okay, Joseph, it is all you.
Shukwana khawach tuasigu ya chek watlin khakwatani ya hayuk atan gitunach singet just sangidyuk atan gin awain khakwatani ya idat ya te khosiku tlati daya khoshuska dasa waswe akhdakh ye ukhi tlwasa uteqa Jesu yake yahayuk atangi kukikwati yewachtu yetiagao. Shukwana khawe ya tlekayuk atangi in khakwatani akhtuansi guchas chigwat in khakwatani shkakwasniki ya akh atat keochne tlekak einach ko Nora Marks Downhauer, Duchana, Richard Downhauer. Ho'owe kunach yashaya dehin and kruk owe yaslin get kruk hasau seyach achaya yak yachat yati so chade khatna o kunach owe achtu yak yak yachat yati ya Georgia khat owe kuiki. Ya aitesh takakad ti tuasi gutso ya chayeko gen ya hasen geduk atangi sa achchi yewachtu yeti yewachtun de tani khsati yai that gunnal chish ya guna yede yadle kayuk atangin khakwatani. So my name is Joseph Marks. I am presenting today on History Becomes Present, Constructing Worlds for Past, Present, and Future Ancestors through Tlingit Oratory. My Tlingit name is Kudek. I am a dual PhD student at the University of Arizona. And I'll begin. In the far back corner of the hall, the older Tlingit woman is standing next to three men. Her hair has grayed in her wise years, yet her age does not stop her from doing what she needs to do. The clan house they are in is filled with 150 Tlingit people, all fluent in the language. Everyone would know if there were any mistakes, and knowing how Tlingits are, the mistake would be corrected on the spot. The standard of oration is high, and everyone is highly aware of what is at stake. She straightens up and begins to project her voice, echoing in the building so all could hear how she would extract grief from the morning. Jesse Dalton, named Natla, belonged to the Dukdaintan clan, was born in Tenakee, Alaska in 1903. When it was illegal to speak any indigenous language, she became highly fluent in English and mastered Tlingit oratory. By the time of the memorial for Jim Marks, my paternal grandfather's older brother, Dalton had become the spokesperson for her clan. Her mastery of Tlingit oratory is demonstrated in this speech, where her task is to remove the grief from the host clan. At the Jim Marks Memorial in 1968, Jesse Dalton, with the use of various Tlingit linguistic features and salient clan motifs, taps into generational knowledge and establishes a chronotopic world in her speech. The creation of the chronotope and merging the past with the present, bringing ancestors of the past and future to the present with the living, ultimately connects families and clans together in one space. Dalton's speech at the memorial, the following table helps illustrate them. You have ya, he, we, and you. And please read the English translation. I will be prioritizing Tlingit in this speech. When a Tlingit speaker is talking about past events or unspecified past times, the speaker will use the you demonstrative. The following example, this is the following example. Yuhuna, long time ago from this night. Using long distance indicating unseeableness, demonstratives would be expected when talking about past. Yet Dalton, who is talking about death and past events, uses demonstratives indicating closeness to her and her host clan. The following are the first 6 lines of her speech. Ishanden age hada tuati uhanso achkal kohas ach ishas ach tleik ach ishas tlatli shanden hada tuati uhanso yawuti yet. We get a glimpse of the deconstruction process of the current timeline, which is that is demonstrated in line 6. Yawutiyet, meaning this thing that happens. This line is in reference to death like in line 1. Since it is dealing with an event that has happened a while ago, one would think that we or you would be used to distance the audience from the grieving from the death. Instead, she uses ya, meaning the death is close to her and consequently close to the listeners. We would assume she would use you because it had happened further in the past, but instead she uses the optionality of Tlingit demonstratives to bring events closer to everyone. This is a juxtaposition of space-time where ya is here now and things that have happened refer to past events. In line 1, Dalton asks the rhetorical question to her brother's children and all of her fathers. To which she answers, she has established realities of life, that death is an aspect of life that does not take pity on anyone. Dalton then addresses the host clan by establishing how she is related to them. In this case, she is related to them because her father's clan and the clan of her brother's children. This is connecting to them through the people of the living. The following passage is in reference to 3 men who spoke just before her. In lines 7 and 9, she returns to the current moment that 3 clansmen have spoken to the host clan. The hosts cried, and they had shown that they are grieving. She tells them that they are there so that tears will not fall without honor. And she then, in the following passage, uses the concepts of tears to break away from the present and access the past through the clan system. Through this passage, Dalton has created the chronotope. She does this by relating 2 aspects of the current moment, that being tears and the host clan's relationship to her clan. By saying that their fathers have all come out, she is doing 2 actions. She is talking about the living clan members who are present, and she is inviting ancestors to occupy the space. This is the foundation of the world. She is occupying it with her clan and her ancestors who are related to the hosts. They are there for the hosts' tears. They are there where the tears are semiotically the motif of grief and pain. I would like to go further into the morphosyntax, but as we are pressed for time, I will skip it for today. Through her, though her grandparents are gone, she still feels their presence amongst them, as seen in line 15 and 17. 15 and 17. At the beginning, she ties the clans together. They then brings forward the host clan's relations, and then she finally brings her family. At the start of her speech, the host ancestors are mingling amongst the people, just as the people are with each other at the memorial. All are there to witness the resolution of how grief will be removed through her speech, and they are all there now in this constructed world. breaking time through semiotic relationships. At'u encompasses Tlingit culture. The literal translation is something that has been purchased. Because they are indexes of the past, the object becomes vessels to the past, as seen in the following passage. Sertak ish du ku yi awe ye du yi kujin awetsa gagi uwagut. In the following passage, Jessie Dalton points to a chilkat robe her clan member is wearing. The man who owned it is Tlatak, an example of At'u. Both the name and the blanket are used as a vehicle to the past. Once she references the past, she says the following: because of you, he has come out. Dalton calls out the name of the steward of the blanket, the father of the host. She invokes the history of the stewardship of the blanket, creating a familial tie. The blanket has become the symbol of their deceased father. The transformation of persona of the standing person anchors the constructed world through the index of the blanket, pulling the events that have passed to the present moment. The past living within the person, very much in the same vein as the spirit cube in Possession, words 2016. This occupation stems from the logic of reincarnation. Logic of reincarnation then comes through with the person wearing the blanket. The person is named after Tlatak. So when she says, because of you, he has come out, in this moment, Tlatak is there before them, transcending time and space. The construction of the chronotope informs us of the Tlingit worldview. First, we use the familial ties in all of the passages discussed. Dalton brings it back to how she and the host clan are related. She invokes the names of their relatives. Right at the start, she calls these names. She is inviting them to the space. The people alive are occupying the space, and the deconstruction of time even more. People living can shed their current persona for persona their names hold. This process is a limited reincarnation. When she incorporates clan objects into the chronotope, she can then bring people to ancestral homelands, as seen in the following passage. Ya gachlatinden you as akawe yan kaslaha shin akanachawe akach to ust atudeawe ya gochch do itutla ishani. Ya idatawe ikakagi kaudzia ya gagan lich gohas kedi ya idat kwaskwashe ye tude sorry chade khatna kwaskwashe ye tude go yahutiak itutla ishani. In line 207 she says, at this moment, this sun is coming out over you, my grandparents' mask. Dalton transforms physical space by bringing in the sun mask. She is saying that this sun has come out to beam its rays into the bereaved. Everyone has drifted to shore and landed on the beach. She makes the physical space transform from a hall to a shore. She does it by referring to the sun mask. She is causing a juxtaposition between space, where she pulls the past to the present and accomplishes this by anchoring the time with that clan object. Line 210, my hope is it's drawing to your core, your grief. This is the line that Jessie Dalton has been leading up to, where Dalton extracts the sorrow. At this moment, Dalton uses a world that has been created, and she occupies it with clan members, both past and present. She takes the symbol of the sun and wills the sun's rays to dawn on them to drive the mourning clan's grief away. In this world, the sun can make the grief dissipate. But why does this matter to revitalization? So indigenizing through chronotopes. Jessie Dalton created a world and space that transcends the period of colonization. At the beginning of this speech, she acknowledges the moment they are in. Someone has passed away. The world that they live in is one where the government does not want indigenous people to speak their language. They have traveled long distance on mechanical boats and flew. These facts about everyday life signal colonization. All people there know about their way of life has changed. They recognize that the culture is going away, yet through the chronotopic world that Jessie Dalton creates, the space they are now in is transformed. The people that are there are all Tlingit, the ancestors are Tlingit. She transforms the room to ancestral homelands and takes the people there on a journey to heal. Discussing decolonization, one might understand it to mean to return to a time before colonization, to turn back time. However, this is not what I argue. Instead, I look at decolonization in terms of healing, taking the grief away, as Dalton has done, a process. She took a space that was built with modern machines and she indigenized it. She invoked the ancestors to be with them. She then manifests place for the audience to see semiotically through clan motifs. She uses the motifs to take the pain away. Ancestors past, present, and future hold hands together that night. Every aspect of life has been transformed to being indigenously Tlingit. This practice of healing has existed before colonial contact. It stems from being Tlingit. Dalton has done more than bring the past to the present. She has indigenized the space. If we aim to revitalize and decolonize, then we must look internally in the culture and the language to find ways of how to do that. Dalton offers a process or avenue for us today to start the decolonization, healing, and indigenizing of colonized spaces and minds. She did it because there was no other way for her to remove the sorrow. She did it because that's who she is. Revitalizationalists must do it because colonization aims to rid Indigenous people of their ways of healing. Living in spaces that are colonial, we must constantly be healing. We must indigenize so one day we too can collapse time and space with the living. Thank you for listening to me today.
Thank you so much, Joseph. So our next speaker will be on Zoom, and we'll have Sandra Keller from Illinois State University. So hopefully you're there, Sandra, and ready to go.
Yes, thank you, Georgia. Oh, so it says the host has disabled participant screen sharing. Is there a way that I can share my slides?
Can I give it another shot? It should be ready for you now.
Thank you. Yes. Hi, everybody. Aligning with our panel's focus on minoritized language futurities, as well as the larger conference theme of crisis and hope, my paper today explores how speakers of Gallo, a minority Romance language of France, have responded to language shift. Traditional models of language endangerment often conceptualize decreasing vernacular usage as crisis. But as critical scholarship on language endangerment discourses remind us, essentializing views of endangerment can erase speakers' political demands and their agency to envision a future. Through analysis of interview and performance data, as well as internet language use, I will outline a range of responses Gallo advocates offered to Gallo's decreasing vernacular presence. While some considered Gallo's future to be that of a langue de musée, or museum language, others discussed Gallo on social media or used 21st century technologies as metaphors for Gallo speakerhood. In so doing, advocates use stances of positive affect and confident epistemology to argue for a present and future for Gallo. Gallo is a langue d'oeil, a Romance variety closely related to Standard French. Gallo has traditionally been spoken in the eastern half of the region of Brittany, with the Celtic language of Breton to the west. As French became the widespread vernacular during the 20th century, Gallo and Breton transmission fell sharply. Today, UNESCO defines Gallo as severely endangered. However, Gallo's indexical link to the private sphere has made enumeration of speakers notoriously difficult, with recent sociolinguistically sensitive surveys estimating almost 10 times as many speakers as UNESCO enumerates. Given my co-panelists' engagements with Indigenous language reclamation, I find it important to note here that Gallo language shift has not been driven by the processes of racialization or colonial violence that Indigenous language users have resisted. However, those who speak, learn, or create in Gallo still face challenges over its place in present-day Brittany. While Gallo has been designated a language of Brittany and is studied in some schools, Breton has a much greater presence in Brittany's symbolic landscape. Breton is widely recognized as part of the region's Celtic heritage, while Gallo is often characterized as deformed French or Hick speech. A 2018 survey found that 35% of residents in traditionally Gallo-speaking areas were unfamiliar with the term Gallo or its other designation of patois. The data presented here thus highlight Gallo users' efforts to imagine a present and future for a variety whose very existence is unrecognized by many of their neighbors. The interview and performance data discussed here are drawn from 12 months of fieldwork in 2013-2014, with data collected in various sites of Gallo cultural production as seen on screen. I additionally analyzed 2 recent instances of internet discourse in and about Gallo. I will first explore how some stances taken by Gallo stakeholders reproduced dominant ideologies of Gallo as disappearing. Then I will turn to a theater performance and new media uses that propose a present and potential future for Gallo. At times, Gallo advocates did draw on rhetorics of language endangerment. Gallo associations invoked UNESCO's severely endangered designation in press releases, and a banner hung by a Gallo association at language festivals read, "Without Gallo, no Brittany," as you can see in Figure 1 on screen. While this wording connotes a sense of existential crisis, informants who acknowledged Gallo's declining usage more often treated it as an uncontroversial fact. For example, at a Gallo play I attended at a high school, the playwright mentioned almost as an aside that Gallo was plus très vivante, certes, no longer very alive, admittedly. On another occasion, I asked a group of older adults taking a Gallo class what they saw to be Gallo's future. As you'll hear in example 1, these women saw Gallo's future to be that of a museum language and doubted that it would have future value to the young people now learning it. I'll play that now.
Ennis, c'est quoi, à votre avis, le rôle du Gallo? Désormais.
Un peu une langue de musée.
Oui.
Peut-être pas forcément.
Oui, enfin.
C'est bien.
Alors, il y a tous ces petits jeunes qui apprennent, il y a quand même...
Ouais, mais bon.
Parce
que les petits jeunes qui apprennent ça dans les écoles,
oui.
Il n'y a pas de pratique.
Il
n'y a pas de suite. Après une initiation.
Oui, après ils peuvent peut-être le faire pour avoir une option qui va leur apporter des points.
Oui, mais dans la vie active et la vie courante.
Après, je sais pas, à part quelques endroits comme.
Mais moi, je me dis que dans les maisons de retraite, peut-être que ça aurait été bien maintenant d'avoir des gens qui fadraient.
Oui, parce que quand on y sera à la
et qu'on se mettra à causer Gallo, parce que ça nous viendra peut-être.
On se mettra pas, parce que dans notre enfance, on a d'abord.
Il y aura des mots qui sortiront, ça c'est clair.
Mais bon,
notre langue maternelle, c'est quand même le français.
C'était le français.
So roughly 500 middle and high schoolers were learning Gallo at the time of this recording, but these women, who themselves also chose to take a Gallo class, doubted it would play a role in young people's professional or personal futures. Laree introduced the possibility that Gallo might play a role in these women's own imagined futures in a retirement home. But while Josette acknowledges that some words may emerge, they have trouble admitting a future for Gallo beyond that. While the frequent sighs or skeptical puffs of air emitted indicate some wistfulness, it seems these learners find it uncontroversial that Gallo will disappear. Such attitudes run counter to efforts by advocates to present Gallo as a language of the present and future. Figure 2 depicts the Twitter profile header of a regional institution that promotes Gallo's usage in public space. This New Year's greeting, which references Gallo's presence in school and its growing visibility in public signage and local media, uses a yellow line to evoke a continuous flow of time for Gallo from the past through 2022 and on to the future. Indeed, even those learners who felt Gallo was fated to be a langue du musée continued to learn and use it, leaving some room for future negotiations of Gallo's role. When I asked Michel, Josette, and Marie what they thought of Gallo activists, Josette and Marie firmly disaligned from an activist identity, but Michel pointed out that on milite à notre façon, en parlant. We take action in our own way by talking about it. The rest of this paper will present Talk About Gallo that imbues the language with a present and potential future. Informed by Bauman and Briggs's understanding that verbal art offers a reflexive arena for audience members to critically examine ideologies, I was curious how Gallo features might be proposed through artistic performance. Sometimes Gallo performances incorporated items indexical of modern life. Figure 3 depicts two scenes from a play where a GPS is prominently present on stage, first as a physical prop and then invoked via gesture. However, when I later showed a recording of this play to 3 non-Gallo-speaking locals, the dominant ideological association between Gallo and the past was so strong that one viewer struggled to situate the play's plot in the present day. When I asked what type of people she thought the characters were, she replied, "I think it doesn't really exist anymore, that type of person," and that Gallo was practically over. She admitted that the GPS was modern, but maintained that she would probably situate the story in the past regardless. So the physical trappings of modern life don't always successfully posit Gallo features. However, in a performance you'll see in the next example, the storyteller uses an emerging technology as a storytelling device to invite the audience to participate in Gallo meaning making. I've analyzed this performance previously for its invocation of Gallo dictionaries, but here I would like to focus on its metaphor of a touch screen. The story A to Z by Gallo storyteller and high school teacher Vauvan Toucourt is a humorous tale of a failed romance that highlights one Gallo lexeme for each letter of the alphabet. Vauvan relies on her audience to supply each new letter, as well as the meaning of the word she then provides. To cue the audience, Vauvan pretends to activate them via touchscreen, as she illustrates in example 2A.
Vous allez m'aider, c'est une histoire moderne. Et vous allez me servir d'écran tactile. C'est comme sur les tablettes numériques, tu connais bien là. Tu fais hop, ça y est, on change de lettre. Hop.
So touchscreens are interactive, and they enable us to access the internet, itself positioned ideologically as distributed knowledge. This metaphor thus enables Vauvan to distribute not only her storytelling responsibilities, but also her Gallo-linguistic expertise with the public. You'll see in example 2B what happens when Vauvan prompts the audience members to supply first the letter C, then the meaning of the Gallo word chope to dose. Now.
C'est comme dans choper. Alors, ça veut dire choper. Dormir à petit cas. Je veux que j'ai affaire à des spécialistes. Parce qu'il y en a qui disent bobé aussi. Hein.
So this distributed storytelling frame allows Vauvan to elicit Gallo knowledge from the audience, whom she casts as specialists. When audience members take these confident epistemological stances toward Gallo, supplying vocabulary and confirming Vauvan's comments, anyone listening who believes that Gallo-speaking people don't exist anymore gets confronted with evidence to the contrary. When skeptics see others demonstrate Gallo expertise, perhaps even people they had not known to be users of Gallo, Gallo's present and future may become more conceivable. Vauvan was not only a storyteller, but also a Gallo teacher who created illustrated videos with her students. Some of these videos, which feature young voices reading Gallo texts aloud of their own composition, have accumulated over 1,000 views. As they circulate within and beyond students, friends, and family, such artifacts make the case that young people see value and a future in Gallo. Like A to Z, new media can provide a forum for individuals to engage in public stance-taking toward Gallo's future. While the audience of a live theater performance is temporally and spatially limited, online comments can circulate among an indeterminate number of publics, thus making pro-Gallo stances potentially more visible. Sometimes positive affect and confident epistemology toward Gallo are demonstrated by writing in Gallo online. Example 3 shows a tweet celebrating the opening of a Gallo class for teachers this past year. The original post was written in French, but the first 2 comments in blue and green there are in Gallo. The first comment iconizes the writer's positive affect toward Gallo education by incorporating a smiling face with hearts emoji. It also demonstrates the writer's epistemological confidence by code switching to Gallo when the original post was written in French. The second response uses Gallo to offer a social critique whose exact force remains ambiguous, but which nonetheless allows the respondent to interrogate the ideological link between gender and Gallo. The final example contains some of the 232 comments to a video posted to YouTube by Wikitongues, in which an employee of a Breton cultural association, Entente, talks in Gallo about the language. Entente mentions that UNESCO considers Gallo to be endangered, But he also claims he has hope for the future because he has seen young people learning and creating in the language. The comments on this video illustrate a range of stances available to those positioning themselves online with respect to Gallo. Some responses foregrounded stances of positive affect toward the variety, as seen in example 4a. I see there's a message in the chat. Okay, never mind. That was not relevant. I was afraid I had lost audio or something. So in comment A, the designation of this video as a Proustian Madeleine is a literary allusion to a cake which sparks a long ago memory from childhood. This commenter may associate Gallo with the past, but like Proust's cake, the video has made Gallo come vibrantly alive in the present, at least momentarily. The authors of comments B and C draw on their own identities as speakers of other minoritized romance varieties to express pleasure at Gallo having a present and at least potential future. Many commenters took epistemological stances toward Gallo not by writing in Gallo, but by making claims about Gallo. Unsurprisingly, dominant representations of Gallo as substandard French resurfaced at times, as seen in the 6 comments in 4b. In all but one of the critical comments shown here, however, such comments were challenged. The one-word dismissal of Gallo as French, in comment D, for example, earned 26 different replies. Challenges to dismissive comments, some of which are displayed in example 8c, served as acts of public stance-taking, where Gallo's defenders could construct their expertise. These comments draw on a specialized linguistic lexicon, including terms like native speaker, oil languages, palatalization, and linguistic atlas. This strategy for connoting epistemological expertise seems particularly likely to be convincing for those who watch Wikitongue's videos on YouTube. As scholars like Dubois and Jaffe have argued, it is through acts of stance-taking that individuals participate in larger ideological processes. Some stances Gallo advocates took reproduced dominant ideologies of Gallo as disappearing, but this was not absolute. Elsewhere, I have argued that displays at Gallo festivals seem designed to encourage the broader public to engage in stances of confident epistemology and positive affect toward Gallo. Here we see these same strategies marshaled to imagine Gallo's present and possible future. The acts of self-positioning and language defining explored here suggest that Gallo is far from vanishing, as it plays a role in contemporary social action in Brittany and beyond. As others have done recently, for example, contributions to Avenari and Harasta, 2021, this analysis problematizes the idea that the present and future of minority languages like Gallo necessarily hinge upon revernacularization. Instead, the effective and epistemological act of recognizing Gallo as a language publicly on the internet or on stage can provide a source of value and some hope for the future. That's it. Thank you, everybody.
Great, thank you so much, Sandra. So we were going to have Christina Newhall Laree here in person with us and kind of bookend our Zoom talks, but unfortunately she has to Zoom in as well. And Christina, do you still want us to play the video of your talk just in case you have any technical issues?
Yes, I think that would be probably best.
Okay, then I will have our tech person pull up that video and we will hear Christina's talk. So Christina Newhall Laree is a PhD candidate. Congratulations, Christina, at the University of Arizona.
Nangang Chichin amaya Angliking amekama Christina Newhall asaktoking amaya unanga kokoking. Hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Christina Newhall, and I am a member of the native village of Unga, originally from Alaska, and also a PhD candidate from the University of Arizona. I'm going to go ahead and get started here. A short ride in Geronimo's Cadillac can take us through an exploration of unexpected juxtapositions of Indians and cars. If you had to pick a single person to stand for Indianness, you could do worse than Geronimo, the iconic Apache leader who stands in American popular memory for resistant warriors everywhere. Likewise, if you had to pick a single car to stand for the world of automobiles, you could do worse than a Cadillac. To imagine Geronimo riding in a Cadillac, then, is to put different symbolic systems in the dialogue with one another. Nearly 2 decades have passed since Philip Deloria wrote about Geronimo's Cadillac in his groundbreaking work, Indians in Unexpected Places. In his chapter on technology, Deloria proceeds to unravel the loaded symbolic meanings entangled and instilled within the collective American social imagination that constitutes the ideological significances of both the Indian and the automobile. Those evocative notions, coupled and provoked by an image of a Cadillac, include mobility, speed, power, status, and progress. Such associations lie at the very heart of American ideals and are inimitably connected to other indexical features relating to social evolution, industry, and modernity, ideals which correspond to what America stands for and what real Americans value. These idealistic notions, as Deloria illustrates, are then juxtaposed with associations of nature, primitivism, and defeat, as those are the associations which index the American Indian. Through the coupling of these two iconic representatives, each which poignantly exist in the American imagination, an unexpected combination occurs, creating a curious space for both recognition and conversation around the established ideological viewpoints. The combination of Geronimo and a Cadillac contradicts established narratives which have formed the ideological foundation and frameworks which a majority of Anglo-Americans comfortably build many unexamined ideological constructs upon, constructs that supposedly represent a reality of sorts, or at least an expectation of reality. By simply driving a car around in the early 20th century, Geronimo creates a mixing up and perhaps even a messing up of Western ideological constructs. Fast forwarding almost 200 years, and we unfortunately find that very few things have changed with regard to the ascription of those symbolic notions which tie modernity to technology and prosperity and indigeneity to primitive backwardness and disappearance. Within the last few decades, the advent of social media has allowed for the creation of new transcendent spaces, wherein the cultivation and maintenance of community can be fostered without the hindrance of those natural geospatial restrictions that, in previous instances of human history, bound and even defined social communities in a very real and physical way. In the following talk, I draw on Bloechl and Hall's notions of tactics of intersubjectivity to examine the ways which young Indigenous people defy established dominant discourses of Indigenous disappearance through their conspicuous presence within modern social spheres. I show how the sites of these social spheres, generally hosted on social media platforms, serve in the construction and promotion of authentic identities of indigeneity. I offer that the processes of authentication that Native people partake through the reproduction and distribution of memes disrupts the prevailing dominant discourses of loss and failure, whereby redressing long-imposed power imbalances through the reorganization of indexical qualities associated with an authentic Native identity. Here I will propose that the intangible spaces of the internet provide a locus for real communicative and creative practices which both contour and mitigate the dimensions of a community of belonging through the relation of intersubjective experiences. I will show how people both retain and reinvent identities, cultivate spaces of social belonging in the 20th century despite the discontinuity of space and place, and negotiate power through recentering of discourses surrounding authenticity and identity. Because reorganization of the social order is fundamental to colonial projects, Indigenous people are necessarily disenfranchised from the budding relationships formed around prospect and productivity. The absence of original peoples and spaces designated for projects associated with modernity and prosperity is necessary, specifically because the realization of development and progress is antithetical to the occupation of autochthonous people, as they symbolize the land in situ, undeveloped, uncultured, and primitive. Indeed, come back here. Indeed, the ideas of progress and modernity are built upon the discourses of disappearance of Indigenous people from space and place. Thus, indigeneity must be absent from discourses of innovation and absent from spaces imagined as either contemporary or advanced. Regardless of contemporary Native American residential locations, the autochthonous people of North America can be said to be living in diaspora, as the systematic attempts to strip meaningful relationships, practices, and tenure with traditional place and spaces has been a persistent assimilationist project for nearly 500 years. And while there is no experience that can be generalized or typified among Indigenous people as prototypical of Native American, the fracturing of tribal identities and lifeways has contributed significantly to shaping those discourses which substantiate internalized narrative of self and instantiate a wider historical assessment of an Indigenous identity. For the sake of a narrative continuity, the notion of a pre-existing way of life before European contact precipitates the notion of an after. This dichotomous timeline is often bridged through identity work, which takes us to the main point of our talk today. In a 1997 editorial on language and community, Judith Irvine reflects on the persistence of social science's attempt to delineate from the socially indistinct an objective community unified through language and practice, existing prior to the conduct of social life, and suggests that the concept's enduring appeal as locatable and investigable real-world social entity is a concern upon which linguistic anthropology must reflect. Irvine also recommends a shift in practices among the practitioners of linguistic anthropology towards the centering of an analytical focus on revelations of complex semiotic processes related to linguistic phenomena and discursive practices of imagined communities. This concept, which she adopts from Anderson 1983. The imagined communities, these imagined communities may extend beyond the immediacies of face-to-face interaction, as the relationships which formulate the boundaries of community are continually reconstructed through discursive practices. Within Indigenous communities, defiance of power imbalances and resistance to the projects of colonization has persisted since contact. And while the natural course of intergenerational exchange in culture and language has been unalterably ruptured, reconstructions and reimaginings of a discrete, coherent, and enduring Native American identity continues to be sustained through means of communication and negotiation. These identities are often constructed through creative means consistent with modern practices of identity construction, but adhere to particular sustaining ideologies which privilege a sense of community over a sense of individuality. The particular strategy I focus on here is the facilitation of a discrete membership and the processes of authentication as they relate to identity. The most ubiquitous method of relating social alignments and conducting identity work within online communities is through the transferal or posting of highly textualized images such as memes. The meme, related to the word gene, is a unit for carrying cultural ideas through symbols, imitable acts, and thematic phenomena, transmittable between the minds of people in a society through means of mimicry. These textual packages are capable of indexing numerous discourses in a single interpretive instance and are made readily available to the processes of recontextualization and reinterpretation. A meme, as a recent form of highly mediated text, shares those representational challenges extant in the creation of a novel, as noted by Bloechl in 1981, namely of stylistically characterizing social phenomena. Semiotic resources or symbols utilized within memes are not restricted to those symbols correlating to spoken language, yet memes are always double-voiced, providing parallel interests aimed at representing an image of a language. Constructing and distributing a meme is a creative process of recontextualizing discourses so they become socially tangible, and wherein language and the images of the speaking persons, clothed in the specifics of a given society at a given point in history, show through behind them. Due to the meme's qualities of transmutability, the deployment or posting of a meme by an individual is always a cooperative act of communication that in that the texts are perpetually recycled and reinterpreted in every instance of their usage. The memes cited here are representative of emergent identities which bridge a multitude of cultural touchstones and are relevant and representative of the embedded multicultural settings and realities of Native Americans and Alaska Native peoples who engage in online consortium. The memes in this slide are a sample of texts which draw on essentialist notions of indigeneity to create a metacommunicative text that reflexively relates to the shared struggles of colonialism and modernity through humor. And I'll just zoom in on these. Among these memes are depictions which link historic conceptions of indigeneity to the present-day medium of the internet's social media platforms, and by extension, to the interlocutors who circulate and engage with them. These depictions carry multiple overlays of meaning and employ a creative use of what Breivik 1988 and Buchholz call strategic essentialism. Memes can effectively forge political alliances among Indigenous interlocutors by erasing difference and highlighting commonalities in a process that Buchholz refers to as adequation. Many online memes created by Native Americans carry on the work of adequation by emphasizing cultural commonalities which emerge from the conditions of a marginalized social position and reflect or reiterate the established unifying political stances that have emerged from the historical events that led to this position. The Indian figures represented in this slide, namely the Apache leader Geronimo and Nez Perce chief Joseph, who are both famous for their resistance to colonial occupation, are symbolically deployed as a representation of all North American Indians. The text, though intended to excite a humid response, relates to the shared frustration with the injustice that has been salient throughout the historical occupation of North America by European and European descendants. And then looking toward the upper left corner, these romanticized images of the highly spiritual Indian or a hyper-masculine, swarthy, and savage Indian male are pervasive in Western culture, in Western cultivated stereotypes. Among memes created by Native people, such stereotypes are often redeployed as archetypes, or perhaps in more appropriate Bakhtinian terms, chronotopes. These images are indicative of the unachievable ideas associated with a past narrative that indexes an Indian identity for the wider dominant culture, but which contrasts with the reality of an embodied Native identity. The contrast or juxtapositioning of these stereotype textual depictions, along with an underlying acknowledgement of the total failure of Natives to actually achieve such standards, are frequently the crux of the humor which is inlaid within many Native constructed memes. The memes in this slide are representative of the ongoing identity work that are meant to downplay intersubjective likeness in a process of what Buchholz calls distinction. wherein the subjects of the memes symbolically represent the structural institutions of power and of the power relations between the dominant members of society and native peoples. The memes shown in this next slide are representative of the ongoing identity work toward a goal of authentication. These memes include contemporary instantiations of credible Indigenous experiences. Through visual text, they are meant to highlight aspects of identity that are indicative of the imagined prototypical Native American. Because memes are composites of meaningful text, the context of their deployment, the location of their posting, the identity of the poster, all contribute to the meaningful interpretation of the meme. These memes frequently involve multiple processes of identity negotiation or tactics of intersubjectivity, as many of the overlaid texts are reflective of interactional conditions that are interrelated issues in Native American lives and imagined social groups. In real-life scenarios and within online spaces, symbolic differences are constructed through the deployment of highly textualized discursive means that draw both on widely available semiotic resources as well as more constrained signs narrowly related to particular kinds of human experiences. Insider and outsider statuses can thus be mitigated and delineated on publicly accessible sites through cultural and communicative competencies. Interpretation of densely textualized memes in these memes are capable of obscuring meaningful messages from those who lack the appropriate competencies associated with particular practices of identity. The sample of memes here are examples of more constrained discourses meant for a narrower Indigenous faction. On popular social media platforms, incorporating content which orients meaning around more constrained social experiences, particular to certain factions, effectively limits access to the meaningful content, whereby rendering these texts private, even though they exist within a public online space. The immediate interpretability of these messages are obscured by way of incorporating or alluding to funds of knowledge that are shared by a minority of the entire internet's public sphere. Such memes can effectively serve as tactics of authentication, as comprehension of the content serves as a barrier to the inside joke, the meaning, significance of the text. This tactic further accomplishes outlining the contours of the community groups through available semiotic resources. And finally, the memes in this slide are illustrative of the identity work done in the area of reclaiming and reshaping the narratives that characterize Native Americans and Indigenous people. These texts incorporate tactics of adequation in that they emphasize commonality across lines of difference. But it's important to observe that they do not seek to erase difference. Through tactics of adequation, these memes serve to create political alignments. The tactic also serves to combat the prevailing homogenizing discourses associated with autochthonous people by the dominant discourse. It is specifically the homogenizing projects of assimilation that is the common but unnamed threat which unites individuals who identify as Native. The power to realign narratives of indigeneity along value systems and experiences that exist outside the dictations of the dominant discourse becomes the power to reimagine and redefine identity outside the constructs of the dominant discourse. The consequences of endearing dominant discourse constantly threatens the authenticity of any Indigenous identity because a modern Indian is simply an existential paradox. The social formations present on the internet are in a constant state of flux as media is constantly reshaped and recapitulated. This plasticity inherent to social media texts makes a convenient site for identity work. And because of this, social media platforms have become popular hubs to perform and remake identity. Indigenous identity schemas must be malleable and plastic in order to effectively project the survivance of a traditional identity within modern contexts. A resilient indigenous identity is one that is elastic enough to endure radical delocalization from place, one which binds past and present and sustains a communal identity through the imagining of a coherent continuation of traditional community identities. Importantly, it is one which defies the existential limitations dictated by the dominant discourse.
Great, thank you so much, Christina. So our next speaker will be Christopher Bloechl of the University of Chicago, also joining us from Zoom.
Can everybody hear me and see me? Wonderful. Okay, hello everyone. I'm Chris Bloechl. I'd first like to thank Georgia Ennis for organizing this panel. And I also want to mention that Yucatec Maya speakers call their language Maya, and I've mostly followed that convention here. So any references I make to Maya language mean Yucatec Maya in particular. In the Mexican Yucatan, the Maya constitute a visible segment of the population, marked especially by language. Government programs focus on them as a key demographic, and the tourist industry curates their crafts and traditions for material ends. Spanish newspapers and academic publications alike frequently refer to the Maya communities of the region. The regularity of these identifications belies the tenuousness of Maya ethnocultural identity. Indigenous Yucatecans identify as Maya speakers, using the term Mayero, but many are hesitant to identify themselves as Maya. As Catzil Castañeda explains, quote, ethnographers of Yucatan quickly learn to overcome and then forget their shock when they first hear a monolingual Maya speaker tell them that he or she is not a Maya, that all the Maya are long gone, and in the same breath that the real Maya live in a town just over there where they speak the authentically true, really real Maya. Yet if one goes there, they will tell you the same story about some others who live elsewhere, who are indeed the real Maya. Countless visitors to the region have had conversations like this with locals. Maya speakers today say that their ancestors spoke Hach Maya, that is really the really real Maya language, whereas the language spoken today is mixed with Spanish words. Several have studied the phenomenon. For example, Anthony Berkeley, Barbara Feiler, and Catherine Rhodes. As their work demonstrates, Maya speakers have customarily located Maya authenticity at spatial and temporal horizons. Over the past few decades, however, the gradual development of an official, purified Maya standard has complicated matters for speakers and for researchers as well. In a recent paper, Catherine Rhodes offers an account of how current institutionalizations of Maya language adopt and reconfigure the conventional Hach Maya, that's the real Maya model. She compares Hach Maya of the past with contemporary institutionalized Hach Maya along multiple dimensions. Stereotypical users of the former register are elder monolingual Maya speakers, especially men, with limited formal education. The latter version, by contrast, is developed and used by formally educated Maya Spanish bilinguals. In this paper, I examine discourse at a Maya radio station that is peripheral and yet critical to the institutionalizations of Maya language that others have described. The radio announcers use standardized Maya, which is especially significant because the station has a large vernacular audience. I find that vernacular conceptions of pure language facilitate the enregisterment of a modern Maya standard, but they also encumber it. Speakers interpret linguistic mixedness as evidence of declining Maya status. This is an obvious problem from the perspective of Maya advocacy, but the problem is not so clear-cut for vernacular speakers. They generally value efforts to preserve the language, but they also see in their mixed speech a sign of their own modernity. In Yucatan, Maya media constitutes a sizable and growing field, thanks largely to government funding. Advocates interpret the media initiatives as crucial realizations of an indigenous people's right to communication in their own language. Maya speakers constitute a sizable demographic, numbering approximately 800,000, which is targeted by various government programs focused on education, health, and socioeconomic advancement. Increasingly, institutions have sought to offer more services in Maya language. But the Maya register developed and utilized under the umbrella of standardization differs markedly from the spoken vernacular. The most obvious difference stems from linguistic purism. Whereas vernacular Maya employs countless Spanish loans, the standardized register uses Maya neologisms and archaisms in place of these loans whenever possible or practical. But it is virtually impossible to avoid all Spanish lexemes. Nevertheless, mediatized Maya displays marked purism. The meanings of many pure Maya lexemes are opaque to vernacular speakers at my field sites. Of course, there is an irony in affirming the linguistic rights of Mayas as an indigenous people via the codification of a purified standard. But proponents of the register interpret the mixed state of the vernacular as evidence of language shift, and they view the continued borrowing of Spanish lexemes as a threat to the language. Given the institutional ascendancy of standardization in its media channels, the register would seem poised to displace the vernacular, or at least to further vernacularize it. But the process faces numerous obstacles, alongside the obvious issues posed by purism. Users of standardized Maya represent a very small portion of Maya speakers, namely academics, educators, and media creators. The register is primarily used in mediatized texts, print and online, and in pedagogical settings focused on such texts. Audiences for Maya print media remain quite limited, as most Maya speakers cannot read Maya. Geratas, who has examined Maya standardization from language planning and educational perspectives, describes the process as a struggle. She even found vast variation in the written Maya used in classrooms where teachers are instructed in Maya writing norms. My ethnographic work on Maya radio production and reception illuminates the process from a different angle. The Voice of the Mayas, a popular station in southern Yucatan, is institutionally marginal to the standardization project, but it plays a noteworthy role in the process itself. The station's announcers occupy a unique position by virtue of their commitments to competing ideologies of language, media, and identity. As Maya advocates, they want to defend the language against mixing and loss, but as public communicators with a mass audience, they want to effectively inform and entertain their vernacular listeners. Their radio programming invokes entrenched notions of Maya authenticity that hinge on the ancient provenance of Maya language and culture. Yet at the same time, in their work and status as professionals, the radio announcers represent public figures of Maya modernity. The announcers negotiate these tensions in different ways. They moderate their linguistic purism in some broadcast contexts, and they employ a subtle language pedagogy in others. The announcers also use radio programming genres to channel different images of Maya language. For example, a program called Popotan, that is stories, presents folk tales as repositories of ancient Mayaness. At the beginning of each episode, the narrator repeats the show's title in a slow and mysterious sounding voice, while a conch shell blows in the background. This is meant to be an ancient Maya voice. By contrast, the radio announcers employ a courteous, informative manner of speaking in their news shows and other daily talk programming, a modern Maya voice. And they perform yet another voice, a rustic Maya voice, for a radio show populated by fictional peasant farmers in a rural village. Interestingly, for all three voices, the announcers use purified Maya consistent with the emerging standard. And so linguistic purism is not just at odds with effective reference at times, but also with realist representation. Despite the popularity of the radio station, I found scant adoption of standardized Maya among radio listeners. However, the Maya broadcast register is highly regarded by local vernacular speakers, who evaluate it as good and legitimate. Certainly, the developing state of the register and the limited material incentives for learning it dissuade popular uptake, but ideological factors also bear significantly on the issue. Users of both registers, standardized and vernacular, conceive linguistic purity in chronological terms. Pure Maya language is ancient and mixed Maya is modern. But the perceived ancient quality of pure language may be invoked to justify contrary linguistic prescriptions. For users of standardized Maya, the rarity and authenticity of ancient linguistic forms lend authority to the register. For vernacular speakers, however, ancient words are just out of place in modern speech. When vernacular speakers mention their mixedness, they're not simply denying their authentic Maya status, they're also making a positive claim about their modernity. And language is not the only phenomenon that speakers conceptualize this way. Mayas readily cite other kinds of mixedness that they exhibit or embody. Modern dress alongside traditional clothing, modern labor alongside subsistence agriculture, mixed ancestry. These other sorts of mixedness are overshadowed by the linguistic focus of Hach Maya, that is real Maya discourse, but all constitute an integrated domain. The motivations behind vernacular speakers' disinterest in purifying their own speech are therefore not narrowly linguistic. Purity and temporality represent interlinked axes of differentiation, to use a concept of Susan Gall and Judith Urban, in the vernacular model of Mayaness, which encompasses language, personhood, and cultural belonging. Together, the two axes shape speakers' construals of language. I have found, surprisingly, that Maya speakers have some difficulty recognizing the purity of modern purified Maya. Radio talk is laden with pure Maya forms, but the announcers simply cannot avoid all Spanish loans, and they're hyper aware of this mixing, and they evaluate it against an imagined variety believed to be truly pure. Similarly, radio listeners recognize particular lexical items in radio talk as real Maya, but they don't usually recognize the broadcast register itself as real Maya. In a sense, modern and local speech cannot truly be real Maya. The integration and deployment of Hach Maya in standardized Maya is thus moderated by countervailing vernacular notions. This vernacular outlook has a deep history, as evidenced by its wide distribution on the peninsula and as revealed by Anthony Berkeley's ethnohistorical study. The Maya of colonial elites was mixed with Spanish, Berkeley explains, and became a model for indigenous subjects. Later, the model was inflected by ideologies of indigenismo that interpreted mestizaje, mixedness, within a nationalist vision. Today, it's conducive to a heritage-based notion of Maya identity that similarly locates authentic Maya language and culture in the past. The Mexican nation state remains a principal player in all this. Maya ethnolinguistic advocacy and media production are largely governmental undertakings rather than commercial ventures. Official designations specify Maya speakers as indigenous citizens of a plurilingual, pluricultural nation. In standardized Maya, Mayas and other indigenous ethnolinguistic groups are referred to as Masewalca, that is, indigenous people. The phrase is a direct calque of the Spanish pueblo indígena, and it is commonly used in Maya print media, radio broadcasts, and online sources. It's also used in Maya titles for governmental organizations that administer policies on programs for indigenous citizens. And usage of this calque is motivated by linguistic purism, although interestingly enough, Masewal is actually Nahuatl in origin. For Maya advocates habituated to the purified standard, Maya and Masewal Ka are the appropriate terms of a straightforward taxonomic classification. The Maya are a token of the indigenous people type. But just as with ethnonymic uses of Maya, local perceptions interfere with official designations for Masewal, which could be glossed in English as either Indian or indigenous. Many resist Masewal because it connotes poverty and low social class. In short, the Indian sense of Masewal is more conventionalized among speakers than is the indigenous sense. Bricker and co-authors tellingly gloss Masewal as Indian inferior, and Gabbert offers historical context for the negative social meanings of the label. Maya ethnolinguistic advocacy work involves encouraging speakers to construe their own Mayaness and indigeneity within broader orders of identity. To this end, Masewal Ka, again, indigenous people, is used to describe the Maya of Yucatan, other ethnolinguistic groups in Mexico, and indigenous populations elsewhere in the world. The cosmopolitan vision of Maya and Masewal identity is not equally shared among Maya speakers. And certainly the aforementioned negative social meanings associated with the Masewal category impede the contemporary institutional interpretation. The use of real Maya lexemes in institutional settings today reflects shifting locales of linguistic authority. Linguistic purism offers new avenues for expertise and professional advancement, particularly for educated Maya Spanish bilinguals. And the categories Maya and Masewal have taken on new social meanings amid modern politics of identity. I've emphasized the role and persistence of vernacular conceptions in these developments. The enduring folk notion of real Maya is instrumental to the purified Maya standard, that is the authorized medium for the public Maya voice. And yet, for many Maya speakers, pure language belongs in the past. Thank you.
All right, I guess that means it is me. So, hi everybody. Let me just remember what my password is. Thanks so much, Chris. Sorry, I always forget how to pronounce your last name. Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for being here, kind of sticking with us to the end. I know it's been a stimulating conference and everyone's probably getting a little tired, so we'll adjourn to some wine and the keynote. So my name's Georgia Ennis, and I'm a visiting fellow in the Center for Humanities and Information at Penn State. And today I want to talk to you about language oppression and what I call multimodal reclamation in the Western Amazon. So when I started doing my research in the Ecuadorian Amazon, I was really most interested in the use of media for language revitalization, and especially to think about the methods of language revitalization and the modes and codes and registers involved in media production. But I really had to start rethinking this when Jaime Chihuango, who was the Quechua mayor of Archidona between 2014 and 2019, explained to me that his administration funded a radio program in order to transmit and strengthen culture. So according to Jaime, the culture really included food and dance, Quechua sport, or what's called hunting, the pahuyuks, which is the transmission of powers between people, shamanism, as well as natural and ancestral medicine, and how to survive or live in the rainforest. So the municipal radio program encouraged residents of Archidona to reconnect with these techniques by collecting stories about them and staging live broadcasts based in people's remembrances. So why would a program that most people experienced by listening focus more on all of these embodied practices than on language? So language was important, but what I really came to understand is that the focus in Quechua media is really to see language revitalization as about more than language. So Amazonian Quechua people engage with broadcast and performance media as a form of community-oriented and community-directed language revitalization. So it's really a community-directed form of language reclamation that's based on community perspectives and needs. So in my time today, I want to talk to you about three things. First, I want to consider what I see as some conceptual weaknesses that can be involved in academic approaches to language shift. And I want to emphasize instead what Alice Taff calls language oppression. Then I'll briefly introduce you to the importance of a fiber called pita and the ways it connects historical and environmental knowledge. And finally, we'll explore the ways that broadcast and performance media encourage participants to reclaim these cultural practices and environmental knowledge, like the production of pita, alongside language as a method of multimodal language reclamation. So why do I prefer a model of language oppression over language shift? I think there are several ways that scholars like myself, Euro-Americans who find ourselves working within institutional and settler frameworks in our work with Indigenous language speakers can really miss what's most important in settings of language shift and revitalization. And so I see this as a tendency to treat language as an abstract system that's separated from communicative contexts. So the failure to account for some of these ontologies of language that we've been thinking about, the failure to account for the ideological and material oppression of speakers and signers of endangered languages, and also a tendency to ignore the perspectives and theorization of Indigenous scholars and other intellectuals. And really, I think all of these are points that Indigenous scholars have made before and to which I've turned in trying to make sense of some of this ethnographic information. So this is really why I prefer a model of language oppression over language shift. So Alice Taff and her colleagues define this as the enforcement of language loss by physical and mental and social and spiritual coercion. And then this also includes forms of material and economic and ecological domination. So one way that academic allies and activists have really separated language from its communicative context in Ecuador is through language standardization. So in Ecuador, there are approximately 8 regional varieties of Quechua that are spoken. And so there are about 5 in the highlands and 3 in the lowlands. And in Napo, the province where I work in the Ecuadorian Amazon, regional speakers of Quechua feel themselves to be oppressed, not just by Spanish, but also by the standardized variety that's known as Unified Quechua or Quechua Unificado. And this is a variety that levels regional differences, and it really differs quite a bit from Napo Quechua. as you can see in this slide. So here's some of the morphological and phonological forms for kind of the Amazon, and then a more general sketch of the highlands. And so you might notice that Upper Napo Quechua really differs quite a bit from both Highland Quechua as well as Unified Quechua. And then Unified Quechua and Highland Quechua pattern much more closely. So in Napo, people really experience the standard language to be closely linked to the highlands and to really see it as a foreign imposition. So language standardization and the widespread use of the standard in institutional and educational settings is one of these unexpected dimensions of domination, which Quechua people confront in terms of language standardization in bilingual education and institutional media and formal politics. But another way that linguists and external allies can misunderstand language shift and revitalization is also by ignoring some of these oppressive factors that actually produced shift. So in Napo, 3 of these most important sites for language oppression that I look at more depth in my book relate to extraction and wage labor, missionization and education, and land reform and settlement. So settler colonialism in the Amazon is in large part driven by oil extraction as well as other extractive industries. And it's extractive colonialism that really creates the infrastructure for settlement and other forms of development in the region like agriculture. And it's these forms of environmental disruption that severely limit the ability of Quechua and other indigenous peoples to subsist in the rainforest. So this isn't a photo from my research. It's actually from 2022 during the most recent oil spill in Napo, which followed one that occurred during the pandemic. So you can think about the ways that the pollution of the Amazon, the loss of land really limits people's ability to make a life. So ways that environmental racism and language shift are very closely connected. We also see that the industries like oil and other forms of extraction bring economic development to the region. And this leads to an increased reliance on wage labor in these industries, which is really enabled by knowledge of Spanish and makes Spanish the economically dominant language, while it also interrupts daily routines and forms of family organization. Missionization and the extraction of petroleum in the Amazon are also very closely linked. So missionaries were in large part responsible for settling and civilizing, quote unquote, indigenous populations. And of all of these settler processes, missionization most directly intervenes in language change, as I think we are all familiar with, but it also really intervenes in ecological change. So this photo from 1930s from the Josephine Mission is entitled "The Forest Gives Way to Rational Cultivation," ostensibly under the tutelage of the Italian Josephine missionary at the center of the frame. So this is another way that people are pushed towards Spanish and also really changing people's ideological relationships with the forest and shifting forms of subsistence. And that also ties into ongoing processes of land reform and settlement. So since the 1960s, the Ecuadorian government has really sought to stimulate economic development in the region by opening so-called unused lands to new settlers through the aptly named National Institute of Colonization. And so we can see that Quechua people really have lost the land base that allowed them to engage in more of their traditional subsistence practices. And so although these are not always emphasized in relationship to language change, I think that they can all be linked to social and material worlds that affect linguistic practices and forms of interaction. And they're forms of disruption that have to be addressed in order to strengthen and reclaim language practices in the Amazon. So what I really found in my research is that participants in the Napo Quechua broadcast and performance media industry often sought to reclaim both regional linguistic forms that they saw as threatened by Spanish, as well as unified Quechua, as well as the social environments that had been disrupted by settler colonialism and intergenerational forms of transmission. So the production of a natural fiber called pita is one site that links language to social relationships and material practices. So for Upper Napo Quechua speakers, the leaves of this bromeliad, it's kind of wild pineapple, can be pounded and scraped and twisted to produce a natural fiber called pita. And this is a product that people have been weaving for hundreds of years. It's part of regional trade networks and was also extracted as tribute under Spanish colonialism from Amazonian Quechua people by priests and landowners. It's also quite difficult to make, and it's really connected to women's knowledge. So the production of pita is understood to be a gendered task. Here you see Serafina Grefa processing pita at her home. And so she once told me that my mother used to say you have to earn money by scraping pita and doing a woman's kind of work. So women tend pita near their homes, and they're responsible for processing the fibers and hand twisting them into cords and then weaving them into net bags and other products. But despite the significance of pita and shigra, bags, and other skills, these are really not being transmitted to the same degree to younger women as they were in the past, in large part because their days are occupied by formal schooling and homework and other kinds of labor. So in this context, cultural activists have turned to media as a multimodal vehicle to reclaim the production of pita and the use of shigra. So what do I mean by multimodal language reclamation? I think multimodality has a number of senses, and they have to do with both the communicative and semiotic modes, as well as the media practices involved in language revitalization. So by thinking about multimodal language reclamation, I'm really thinking about the ways that community members can seek to reclaim the right to more than just a linguistic code, but also the associated interactional practices in forms of verbal art and other forms of knowledge, like how to make a life in the rainforest. So how they're really trying to reclaim all of these together. So I want to look at one example of how this worked by looking at the production of pita and also the shigra that you see being woven in this photo through performance media and in the Napo Quechua broadcasting space. So one place that pita and shigra show up a lot is in cultural pageants like this one, which is actually named after pita and crowns the Miss Pita vine, or Pita Huasca Nusta. So the contestant here is dancing with the shigra and demonstrating the different steps of producing pita. And so it can seem like pageants might be very fleeting or have limited effects, but they're actually an important way that young women can enter into politics and reconnect to familial knowledge and also come into greater forms of cultural appreciation. And so you might be able to see that as the young woman is dancing, she's performing a lot of the same actions that Serafina was as she produced pita at her home. Okay. Pita also shows up in other media contexts that allow for greater interaction and demonstration and discussion. So this is a segment from a live broadcast of Mayor Shiwango's radio program, Mushuvyambi, that occurred in September 2016. And in this broadcast, the weaving of shigra and also the production of pita really emerged as an important part of gendered cultural knowledge, which is embedded in intergenerational interaction. So in this segment, this woman, Mama Olga, aided by the radio host Rita Tunay, led these two young girls in a discussion of pita. And the live audience and listeners at home also learned about it. So as you can see here, Mama Olga explained the importance of shigra and how her elders had taught her the skill as an economic practice. So, weaving shigra and selling them, you must earn money, was what her grandmothers told her. So, and you'll remember that Serafina similarly reflected on the importance of selling pita, suggesting that it's part of a larger discourse of value and gender in land-based practices. And so we can think about sort of how pita emerges in women's collective memory in Napo. But pita is also connected to reclamation events that take place off stage. Behind the scenes, organizations like the Association of Upper Napo Quechua Midwives train young apprentices in cultural practices like producing pita and weaving shigra in preparation for regional cultural presentations, as well as a part of community tourism. So at one event, the founder of the organization, Maria Antonia, led this young woman, Kelly, in a counseling session. And she reminded her that pita should never be in short supply and that it should be planted near the home. And she also emphasized the importance of pita for a woman's development, linking it to the fulfillment of a woman's gender role. So as you can see here, that she suggests that only then will she fully become a woman when she grasps all of this knowledge, all of this information. And crucially, in this counseling session, she also advised Kelly to plant her elders' words in her heart and to remember them. So taken in isolation, the individual events of beauty pageants or radio shows or performances or even daily interactions at cultural centers might not seem like enough to return regional Upper Napo Quechua to active use among younger speakers or to improve intergenerational interaction and transmission. But on the radio program Mushukyambi, or A New Path, the host frequently claimed that the program existed so the audience members would not forget their elders' knowledge. So their programs and the interconnected mediascape of which they are a part were really grassroots sites of remembering. And this too was a form of reclamation of an oppressed language, which was directed by community members in response to their own history and knowledge and goals. Reclamation of Pita and Shigra as significant cultural practices in the face of recent settler colonial disruptions to local ecologies, economies, and interaction point to the ways that speakers of oppressed languages like Quechua engage in multimodal or more than language reclamation. And such practices seek to interrupt oppressive economic systems that devalue handicrafts and traditional materials, as well as the people who make them and the knowledge they use to do so. So I'll end there by saying thank you and ashkapagarachu, and then I'd like to dedicate this talk to a woman that taught me a great deal about language, Serafina Grefa. So I look forward to your questions, and thank you so much for being here. So it looks like we have about 15 minutes before we have to close at 5. So Tony, unfortunately, could not be here with us today for comments, but if any of you have questions, we'd love to have a chance to talk more.
Materials provided for the map were in Spanish, or was it released by teachers?
So the missionary materials?
Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of the Josephine missionary materials are written in, sorry, I forgot about the mic. So the Napo Quechua missionary materials are, I believe, a translation from Spanish into Quechua, and they're usually utilizing Highland Quechua forms, though they've also published some more unificado-based like Bibles and other materials. But the missionaries also just instituted Spanish as the primary language of school. So most people recount being punished for speaking Quechua by having to, mow the grass of the schoolyard with a machete or carry rocks or things like that. So there's a lot of different ways that they were intervening. Yeah.
Why was
So at the time that they were entering in the Amazon, there was not unificado. So unificado kind of emerges in the 70s and 80s, but they were really getting going in the 30s and 40s. Yeah, thanks. How use of objects and material practices alongside the different kinds of mediated I invite either of you to kind of mask or Joseph's piece to look to be multimodal really opens up a lot.
Yeah, So your comment really reminds me of my grandmother. She said this ha'atu ha'kostir siti, and it means atu is our way of life. And I couldn't go further in depth with what atu is in Tlingit culture, but I can do it now. Atu, it means something that has been purchased, but it's literally everything that is encompassed in what a clan is. So all history is based off of this. And in my longer article, I go into a story about how where I come from is called Tlakuan. It means the village that has always been there. And this originally used to be a Kagwantan village, but my father's people, they came from Alsech in Yakutat, and they came over, and somebody near this area of Tlakuan and Jishkat, and somebody went overboard and they drowned. And the Kagwantan people at the time, they saw this as it being purchased. So everything about this story belongs to my father's people, the Lukahadi. So this water area, it belongs to the Lukahadi. The land belongs to the Lukahadi, and it's an agreement between the Kagwantan and the Lukahadi of Jishkat. And so everything that comes from this history becomes atu, and it can be put into objects, and those are always commissioned by another clan, the opposite clan. So it's always commemorated. So the sun mask is atu for the Taktentan people of Huna. And this is what was so significant about it, is that these objects are imbued with all of that history in everything that we are. It's not meant to just be artifacts that sit in history. It's meant to be used for our future generations. So often we call this cry songs. So this was a really unfortunate event, and often those are commemorated in cry songs. And I remember an elder saying, there's gonna be a day where my grandchildren need these songs. And so this song is also atu. So when we say ha'atu ha'kostir siti, we really mean it. Everything that we are is atu. So this also translates to the materiality, but the materials themselves hold all of that meaning that transcends time, both past, present, and future. It's going to be published to be announced right now.
Yeah, so we're turning this panel into a special issue of American Indian Culture and Research Journal. I'm co-editing it with Erin Davenport. And so Joseph's talk, Chris's talk, Christina's talk, and a few others from sort of the wider panel that we've been working on will be coming out sometime this year, probably early next. So keep an eye out for that. And yeah, I think that's a really great question about materiality. I noticed when I was in the field that there was sort of this circulating discourse of, kids these days don't want to speak Quechua, they don't want to drink chicha, and they don't want to eat spicy food. And so chicha is the manioc beer that they make in the Amazon, and it's normally produced by chewing a little bit of manioc and then letting that ferment in the mash. And so it's really racialized, it's very stigmatized among the mestizo population, and it's also a practice that's shifting. And I think a lot of people see sort of that discourse as maybe, just like, oh, kids these days, they don't want to do these things. But I think I would like to take it seriously and see it as a part of a broader understanding of relational Quechua practices. And I thought that, when I was doing my fieldwork, they really wanted to do a project to revitalize Quechua or to chicha production, right? So not just revitalizing Quechua, but actually thinking about how to revitalize chicha, document the different ways of making it, because it's not just chewing, there's different funguses that you can use and ways that those are made. So there's a lot of ways that the knowledge of the language and relationality with other people and how you have hospitality and conviviality, all of those things are a part of the kinds of language revitalization and reclamation that people are undertaking in Napo. So, yeah, thanks.
I'm coming up to the microphone because I want to also engage the people coming in via Zoom. This was a really fascinating panel, and I could ask questions of every single paper. They were really stimulating. I want to ask about coming back to the theme of the session, the unexpected, which really I think Christina most directly invoked, referring to Deloria's book title. And I wanted to ask about unexpected temporalities and also unexpected publics, because along with the materialities and sort of the tying of practices and acts of speaking to material practices, which the two of you were just speaking to, of course, the mediation, the use of media was another major theme connecting so many of these papers. And so, I wondered, are there unexpected publics, as opposed to assuming that one knows, who is the public or the community, where these language practices, matter. I saw a little bit of things to make one think about that in all the papers, and certainly in Chris's paper, the sort of surprise of people speaking Maya saying, "Oh, I'm not a Maya and I'm not a Maya speaker." But so many things about that. And I think also it speaks to the publics, but also sort of the participation frameworks that get elicited. And in your paper, certainly, Joseph, the participation frames of reincarnation, or even limited, you call it kind of limited reincarnation. So anyways, that was kind of a mess of a question, so do what you like with it. And it's really addressed to all of you, whoever wants to take on whatever you want of that.
Yeah, and maybe somebody on Zoom wants to field that question, since Joseph and I have been taking up a lot of time.
Yeah, again, thanks for this wonderful question. I could say a bunch of different things, but I'll just pick one, and that is something that's interesting about Maya radio. I mean, so radio is a very asymmetrical medium. It's a monologue, but at the same time, it's meant to be dialogic, and the announcers try and cultivate that. One of the kind of unexpected publics that you might say has emerged is the way that people use the radio. It's in southern Yucatan. This station is the only game in town, so it doesn't have any competition. So it plays everywhere, and they've got a big identity message, but most people aren't interested. They just like listening to music, or they like listening to the morning news and whatnot. Well, one of the things that one of the services that the station provides is they transmit messages from listeners. And so let's say where someone would use it is someone from one of the nearby villages would want to come in and then announce, that his sister's birthday or something, or an upcoming wedding. Well, this is a really popular service from the radio station, and one of the things I noticed that people were using it for was is to basically acknowledge kin relations between towns, between villages, and so that's kind of an interesting kind of emergent public, where you've got the radio station that's advocating Maya identity and is really trying to get listeners to engage with their Maya-ness. But then for these vernacular speakers, one of the most important things about the radio station is basically to manage their kinship relations. And so that's kind of an emergent public.
you for that question. Oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say, Christina, maybe you want to take that one.
Yes, I like this idea of unexpected publics. I guess I haven't really mulled that one over. So thank you for putting that out there. I will think about that more. I have thought about it in terms of, basically if you have the ability to access the internet, that the public space is pretty wide open on at least major social media platforms. And so with that, there is a way that people sort of negotiate basically access to the information. And one of the things that perhaps you noticed in the memes is that there is the funds of knowledge that it takes are both, we have to have a shared subjective experience among the interlocutors for whom those memes are meant to specifically address or speak to. And because that's kind of the level where the dialogue and humor and whatnot is going on. And at the same time, the symbols and the images and the semiotic resources that are being used and layered in these ways tend to be part of the wider discourse, movies or political talks or, images. Frequently they're memes that already exist. So they have like a certain formation and layout that has its own subcontext. And then on top of that, then we're adding in something that is more narrowly constrained to certain people, and that kind of creates like these private spaces in this more public sphere. And so it's an interesting thing, I think, this new space and like thinking about what kinds of experiences like people have to share if someone is in Oklahoma and another person's in Alaska and they like probably will never meet and maybe have never been to these same places, and yet they still have so much that they can share on this whole other level. And like what's going on there with that, with those shared semiotic resources and experiences, and why is it this level of communication, like through memes and whatnot, that can evoke so much basically like alignment of understanding or humor or whatnot. And humor is a high level, like that's pretty high level competence. Like you have to have a pretty strong understanding of like all of the elements that are going on and in play, and really, to be able to get that humor. And so it's pretty interesting when you can have like something like a loaf of Wonder Bread and, like 3 pieces of text underneath it. And that can engage like 100,000 people think this is hilarious because they can relate so many of their own personal experiences around this bread and like its multiple purposes. Of course, you have to have an understanding of like poverty and like making do with certain things, and like the resiliency that is behind the humor and whatnot, and how that is healing. A level of healing goes into that, and also creating, I think, kind of alliances in a way of people who understand, that subjective experience. And in other ways, people may witness this meme and it just doesn't, it's not funny, or it doesn't make any sense at all. And so I don't know that the public is unexpected. I think it might actually be that's actually a very big part of why things are set up a certain way, using very familiar text and images that are widely accessible. You know, you can tap into the matrix or something, you know, that like pretty much everybody anywhere knows. And then add in another layer that makes it completely obscure. And so that's where we get that insider and outsider kind of division that's so interesting in this strange new medium of the internet, where it is widely public for the most part. So I hope that answered some part of the question.
And I think we're just about at time, but Sandra, I don't know if you had any thoughts, because you're also looking at, you know, media with different publics that can be engaged by it. And maybe you want to just reflect on some of those comments that you saw in your YouTube videos.
Thank you. When I heard the question asked, my thoughts actually first went to like the notion of unexpected places, in that in local media, when there would be reports on Gallo, you know, it's now possible to take a class in Gallo in this place, or Gallo was spoken on the floor of the National Assembly in Paris. Like the way that news reports would frame use of Gallo anywhere other than like kind of the private and intimate contexts would be coded as unexpected. Like it was discursively presented as an unexpected place for Gallo to be used. So there definitely was this ideological construction of unexpectedness of Gallo with a kind of positive, right? It was tended to be coded as a good thing, but also maybe a little humorous. And my own attending Gallo classes and learning Gallo was often, since I was an American and, you know, US American, many times, you know, I would be asked the question as, you know, why is an American learning Gallo, as something that was a little bit seen as exceptional. And then in terms of the comments on the YouTube video and how the video circulated, part of it is that it was a Wikitongues video, and I think that brings with it a certain set of expectations or frames for reacting to videos. A lot of comments were just like people saying what percentage they understood, and saying like, I'm a native French speaker and I only understood 10%, or I'm a Portuguese speaker and I understood like 60%, or, you know, this kind of game of comparing percentages, which again, that might be linked to the specific source of the video. It's something I'd like to track further in other online spaces. So thank you.
Great. Well, I think we will wrap up there because we're just over time, and I think they probably need to get in here to get the keynote set up. But thank you all so much for being here, and please come and talk to me or Joseph if you want to chat more. Thank you.